Ladies can accompany my life any day. Well, February's almost over, and it's a good thing because I've had already way too much of everything it brought. We made up for that warm, dry January by having extra cold and extra snow. We'll have a day off tomorrow, and then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, all the way to the end of the month. Carolyn Matheson, are you happy now? She wished for snow, you got it. The education minister search team has been busy all month interviewing 4 applicants. I took part in a separate search for a new president of the Grand Rapids Urban League. Those who weren't here missed the Chinese lion dancers 3 weeks ago. We started this Lenten music series, and at the beginning of it, I turned 60. It's been a full month. I could use a little sequestration in my life at the moment, but that will have to wait. May these words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be found true in thy sight, thou who art my rock and my redeemer. Evil. It's all about evil this Lent. Whether at a big shop or a little shop of horrors, evil is everywhere. And it'll be illustrated by songs all season long. And if that sounds odd, evil is very much at the heart of that story about how even the nicest people, Seymour notably, can be caught up in monstrous acts. Of course, evil's part of all really good stories, be it Sophocles or Downton Abbey. Tragedies are about portraying the victory of evil, and comedies about its defeat. A tale without a hint of evil is dull, lifeless. Even children's books are full of evil. We've been putting together quotes from children's books all year. Every affirmation you see comes from a children's book. I especially like the little quote at the top of today's order of worship. I may have ruined my life, but at least I got to eat some really good Chinese food. But children's books have always been about evil. What would Harry Potter be if Voldemort weren't looking for him for 8, how many books was it, 6? What would Red Riding Hood be except a little lost girl if there weren't a wolf waiting for her? Even the Cat in the Hat has a hint of sin in the way he trashes that house. Last week I took us through the idea that there is a devil, say, a force outside us trying to lure us into evil. It's simplistic, I know, but we all have memories of giving into temptation, of doing something we know we should not because something out there tugged on us, food, drink, sex, power. But in the end, we still chose. We still put our names on the dotted line of that little contract and chose to do evil, and that's where I left it. So if we're not totally depraved, as some would say, I'm willing to bet that most of us are willing to try it on now and then. So where shall we go? How can we figure out why we even do it? Well, let's start, of course, with a story. I'm starting with a passage early in Joseph Conrad's book, Heart of Darkness. And at last, in its curved and imperceptible fall, the sun sank low, and from glowing white changed to a dull red without rays and without heat, as if about to go out suddenly. The sun set. The dusk fell on the stream, and lights began to appear along the shore. The lighthouse, a 3-legged thing erect on a muddy flat, shone strongly. Lights of ships moved in the fairway, a great stir of lights going up and going down. And further west, on the upper reaches, the place of the town was still marked ominously on the sky, a lurid glare under the stars. And this also, said Marlowe, has been one of the dark places of the earth. At the outset of this novella, 4 men are on a little boat in the River Thames. As the sun sets, Marlowe tells the tale of his journey up another river, the Congo, into what was called then the Dark Continent. He goes on, "Now, when I was a little chap, I had a passion for maps. I would look for hours at South America or Africa or Australia and lose myself in all the glories of exploration. At that time, there were many blank spaces on the earth, and when I saw one that looked particularly inviting on a map, I would put my finger on it and say, when I grow up, I will go there. By the time I was grown, it was not a blank space anymore. It had got filled in since my boyhood with rivers and lakes and names. It had ceased to be a blank space of delightful mystery, a white patch for a boy to dream gloriously over. It had become a place of darkness. Dark shows up all the time in Conrad, but they actually switch place for Joseph Conrad. Marlowe speaks of blinding light in the African day and the fog that enshrouds his boat and keeps him from seeing ahead. The so-called savage black men are always more decent than the civilized white men who afflict them. How we say yes to evil is what's on my mind today. So let's start with the usual assumption and dispense with it. In the Christian lectionary today, Paul is speaking to the Christians in Philippi, and they're having a rough patch of it almost always. He's writing to sturdy up their hearts, and he encourages them with these words. Brothers and sisters, says Paul, join in imitating me and observe those who live according to the example you have in us, referring to himself. For many live as enemies of the cross of Christ. Their end is destruction. Their God is the belly, and their glory is in their shame. Their minds are set on earthly things. I love that phrase, their God is the belly, about appetite. It's vivid, contains all those assumptions we have about sin, that it's carnal, animal, about our wolfish appetites for the body. And that's what drives us to wrong and evil. Now, in a future week, I'll parse the idea of all those deadly sins. But this morning, the point is, why do we choose the bad at all when we know it's bad? And the answer very simply is we don't choose it because it's bad. We choose it because we actually think it's good. We've convinced ourselves that it's okay and somehow really isn't all that bad. Going back to Mr. Marlowe in the book, he gets his job in the Congo because, and you'll love this little passage, the company had received news that one of their captains had been killed in a scuffle with the natives. The quarrel arose from a misunderstanding about 2 black hens. The captain thought himself wronged somehow in the bargain, so he went ashore and started to hammer the chief of the village with a stick. Now, the captain was the gentlest, quietest creature that ever walked on 2 legs. No doubt he was, but he had been a couple of years already out there engaged in the noble cause, and he probably felt the need at last of asserting his self-respect in some way. Therefore, he whacked the old fellow mercilessly. Did you see the transaction there? A man feels hurt, aggrieved, as though his self-respect has been damaged by something, and so he takes it out on another person. He chooses to be violent in the name of righting a personal, emotional wrong. Rarely do we mean to do bad things. I mean to do bad for bad sake. Most of the time we have, I quote, good reason to do our bad things, to make our bad choices. We sum it up with that phrase that forgives everything. It seemed like a good idea at the time. But even fictional Vulcans from deathless worlds like Star Trek are prone to the same rationalization. I can remember when someone asked Mr. Spock's father why he married a human woman, and his answer was, at the time, it was the logical thing to do. Apparently, even logical creatures can be rationalizing creatures. In reviewing Reinhold Niebuhr last week, I ran into a famous quote that I'll give you now. He said, "No virtuous act is quite as virtuous from the standpoint of our friend or foe as it is from our standpoint." In other words, even when we think we're doing good, chances are we're not objective about the outcomes. Niebuhr viewed selfishness as the essential sin, but as I kept reading and thinking, it wasn't the wolfish selfishness of wanting more food or more power or more sex or more money. It was a much more subtle kind of selfishness, and I do mean subtle in the way the serpent was a subtle beast. It inveigles. We don't even know we're being persuaded. Long ago, when I was in seminary, my first year, in fact, so a very long time ago, a fellow seminary student was a rare creature. She was a female seminary creature. That's since changed. Now, most of the people who go to seminary are women, but not in those days. And she was rarer still in that she was already a good 15 years older than most of us, and she had been married and divorced and had children. And she tells a great story that I've been looking for a sermon for years to tell in, and this is the one. So she is standing in the shower cleaning up when her 3-year-old boy bursts into the bathroom, tears back the shower screen to ask his mother a question, and is stopped cold by the anatomical discrepancy. She patiently, if in the wetness, explains that girls have this and boys have that, which satisfied the instant curiosity, but after pausing for a moment, he looked up at her in that earnest way that only children can when they're not quite sure how bizarre their question is going to be, and said to her with all innocence, "But don't you want one?" Now, Freudians will see a message here, but I don't think so, because every woman I know seems to be quite content with who she is. No envy at all. But the key thing here is the little boy thought she should want one because, after all, he liked his. And that's the thing I want to point to, is that way we all think of ourselves as normal. The way I am is normal. My body is normal. My gender, my sexuality, my race, my nation, my religion. I'm just like everyone else until you see you're not. This, I believe, is the subtle selfishness that we don't realize we carry around. It is not the selfishness of thinking oneself better than others, but of thinking one is just like everyone else, or to put it another way, everyone else is just like you.